The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Was I sane? They had to decide. And where the hell to begin? All that evidence to sift through, those names, theories, opinions, all kinds of stuff. On one side, they didn't have to make many decisions. The facts weren't in question. All they had to do was choose which team had the right justification for my actions. 12 normal, unexceptional people had been yanked out of their lives and now had to debate this. Few of them had even gotten past high school, and now they were to say, to one side or the other, even with all of your backgrounds, your degrees, your writings, your teachings, your treatment of others, your accomplishments and successes in the field, we feel they're more believable than you. From Who I Really Am by John Hinckley Jr. with Jason Norman. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. Today we have a humdinger of a special episode. Today I am speaking with author John Hinckley Jr. and Jason Norman on the book, Who I Really Am. The name John Hinckley Jr. may be familiar to some of you, but his crimes took place back on March 30th, 1981. So bear with me as I explain a bit about what happened on that day for those of you who do not remember or weren't even born yet. So on March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was delivering remarks at the AFL-CIO luncheon at the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. On leaving at 2:27 p.m., 6 shots rang out, delivered in 1.7 seconds. From a .22 caliber ROM RG-14 revolver, firing devastator bullets, which are designed for maximum damage and sometimes explode on impact. The first bullet hit White House Press Secretary James Brady in the head above his left eye, causing extensive brain damage. District of Columbia police officer Thomas Delahaney heard gunfire, turned, and he was shot in the neck. He would fall across Brady screaming, "I am hit." Hearing shots, special agent in charge, Jerry Parr, grabbed Reagan by the shoulder and dove with him towards the open rear door of the presidential limo. The third shot missed the president, flying overhead, striking a window in a building across the street. Reacting, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy spread his arms and legs, blocking the president. McCarthy was shot in the lower chest, hitting him in the lung and liver. The fifth round, it hit the bulletproof rear window of the vehicle as the presidential limo sped off. Rawhide, which was President Reagan's Secret Service code name, was thought to be unharmed, but on the drive back to the White House, Reagan felt some pain, thinking that Agent Parr had broken his rib. But then the president coughed up frothy blood. Quickly, they diverted to George Washington University Hospital, an action that saved the president's life. They later learned that the final shot had passed between the side of the limo and the door, striking the president under his left armpit as he was thrown into the back seat. The round grazed a rib and lodged in his lung, causing it to collapse before the bullet stopped less than an inch, 25 millimeters, from his heart. 3 minutes after the shooting, they arrived at the hospital. At the hospital, Reagan exited the limo and insisted on walking. He acted casually, smiling at the onlookers as he entered the hospital unassisted. But once inside, Reagan complained of difficulty breathing, his knees buckled, and he fell to one knee. He was in shock. His blood pressure was 60 compared to a 140 that is normal for 70-year-old males. Now, statistics from the time held a dire outcome for most 70-year-olds with this kind of wound. But fortunately, President Reagan was in excellent health. When First Lady Nancy Reagan arrived in the emergency room, Reagan remarked to her, quote, "Honey, I forgot to duck," end quote. Ultimately, Reagan survived the surgery by the chief thoracic surgeon, Benjamin L. Aaron. The president was released from the hospital after 2 weeks and had fully recovered by 6 months later. However, the same could not be said for James Brady, the press secretary. He suffered brain damage and was permanently disabled, and he died in 2014 as a result of his injury. At the crime scene, labor official Alfred Antonucci saw John Hinckley fire, hit him on the head, and wrestled him from behind. Tackled and controlled, Hinckley was thrown into the police car. He stoically asked if anyone knew the NCAA college champion score. No one did. He was taken to the local D.C. Metropolitan Police Station, the most secure location nearby. No one wanted a repeat of 1963, which was only 11 years earlier, when the assassin of President Kennedy was himself shot and killed. Being processed in, Hinckley asked if that night's ceremony for the 53rd Academy Awards would be postponed because of the shooting, and it turned out it was. Ronald Reagan was a former actor, and he had taped a message to be played, which was played, but the next evening. Officer Thomas Delahaney recovered, but he was left with permanent nerve damage to his left arm and was ultimately forced to retire on disability. Agent Tim McCarthy recovered fully and was the first of the wounded men to be discharged from the hospital. James Brady, then 40 years old, survived, but his injury left him with slurred speech and partial paralysis that required full-time use of a wheelchair, among other complications. He and his biggest advocate, wife Sarah, saw that the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act was signed into law on November 30th, 1993, and it's often referred to as the Brady Bill. It mandates federal background checks on firearm purchases in the United States. It also imposed a 5-day waiting period on purchases until the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS, was implemented in 1998 during the Clinton administration. The intention of this act was to prevent persons with previous serious convictions from purchasing firearms. August 4th, 2014, James Brady died at the age of 73 in Alexandria, Virginia. 4 days later, the Virginia medical examiner ruled that his death was a homicide, so the injuries inflicted 40 years earlier ultimately had caused his death. Sarah Ann Hughes of the DCist reported, quote, that the traumatic brain injury sustained by Mr. Brady created difficulty managing oral secretions and food and led to aspiration pneumonia and other chronic diseases. The chief medical examiner thus concluded that Mr. Brady's death was determined to be caused by a gunshot wound to the head and consequences thereof, end quote. Now, before 1987, the Washington, D.C. courts followed the year-and-a-day rule, by which a homicide prosecution could only be brought if the victim died within a year and a day of the injury causing death. At the time that Hinckley made his assassination attempt, shooting Brady, the year-and-a-day rule was still in effect, so John Hinckley would not be charged with Mr. Brady's homicide. At the time of the shooting, John Hinckley deludedly believed the attack would impress actress Jodie Foster, with whom he had developed an erotomaniac obsession, beginning after he saw the 1976 film Taxi Driver. John insists that the 12-year-old actress did not arouse him, but he took note of her career from that point forward. In Taxi Driver, he was far more interested in the deranged character Travis Bickle, who attempts to assassinate a presidential candidate. That is where this idea began to fixate in John's mind. As Foster continued making films, he began to take more note of her, his psychosis enveloping her into the fantasy world he had created. He wanted to get her attention and began writing letters and calling her dorm at Yale University. These distortions of reality fused with the fantasy relationship with Foster, the object of his obsession. On the surface, John's behavior remained pretty normal, but he suffered delusions from his schizophrenia, which is the most serious psychological disorder. John Hinckley also suffered from major depression and possibly some narcissism. So, for example, John told his parents he was starting a business, and he exaggerated telling them about his progress, which he was able to kind of pull off for a time until he was forced to ask them for money, which revealed the truth. His parents struggled between helping their directionless son and ceasing to enable his directionlessness. Exasperated, they finally tried tough love, cutting him off while urging him to get himself together. They got him psychiatric care, but he didn't stick with it. During John's trial, his defense presented a CAT scan of his brain with widened sulci, which are the grooves in the cerebral cortex, which Dr. David Baer testified are statistically more common in patients with schizophrenia than in the general population. Controversially, John would be found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a psychiatric hospital in Washington, D.C. After spending many years at St. Elizabeth's, he gradually improved with treatment and hard work. After decades, he began earning privileges, starting with overnight visits to his parents in Williamsburg, Virginia. These visits gradually extended to a week-long and then 2-week trips away from St. Elizabeth's. And finally, in 2016, he was released to go live with his mother, although he faced many restrictions regarding what he could and could not do. By 2018, psychiatric evaluations of John Hinckley could identify no evidence of mental illness, and thus concluded that after years of treatment and medication, there was no danger in releasing John Hinckley. His psychiatric disorders were in remission. At the time, this conclusion did not sit well with President Reagan's children and others who feared that he was still a risk. John would stay with his mother until she passed away at the age of 96 in 2021. Finally, the remaining restrictions on John's life were lifted in 2022. John has spoken with the media over the years, so in talking with him, I decided not to repeat the same old questions. For the record, John Hinckley told me he is profoundly regretful that he shot and hurt anyone, especially the President of the United States, given the consequences, national and international. He lives with the guilt of these acts every day. John explained that he does not even recognize the John Hinckley that he was back in those days, when his psychosis left him completely untethered to reality and his fantasies were so entrenched. John hadn't even considered writing a book, but he was approached and decided that given all that has been said about him over 40 years, that he would write the truth about who he really is. He also recalls some of the kindnesses that he was fortunate enough to experience as he recovered. So with that, I'd like to welcome John Hinckley Jr. and Jason Norman to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast.
Oh,
Hello, welcome.
appreciate you allowing us.
I'm so glad to have you join us to discuss your new book, Who I Really Am. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I want you to know I have reviewed the story of the shooting and its consequences with my listeners. And this is something that has been dissected a lot since 1981. Though I had never heard your perspective before reading the book, which I highly recommend as an important piece of history and insight into all of this. John, you also reinforced the truth that your parents were upstanding, kind-hearted, responsible, salt-of-the-earth Americans who are in no way, shape, or form responsible for what happened. So good for you. And you also gave us a lot of insight into your growing up. So I am going to jump right in. John, I noticed there were like two parts of your early childhood. There seemed to be two events you talked about: President Kennedy's assassination, and then the Beatles being on the Ed Sullivan Show. And these really influenced your life. Sadly, the idea of assassination, but it also started your love for music. So these kind of bookends that kind of represent a lot of your life.
Well, I believe I was 8 years old in 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated, and I was living in Dallas when he was assassinated. So I couldn't believe that this had happened in my city. And it just really affected me. And of course, it affected the whole nation greatly, but it affected this little 8-year-old boy too. And then about 2 months later, the Beatles hit America. And that really, really, influenced me greatly. I was just enthralled with the Beatles. And my parents bought me a guitar. And that's when I started my life in with music.
That's what I mean. It seemed like those two things seem to be representative of a lot of what's going to happen in your future. And you weren't alone. Everybody was enthralled with the Beatles. They just absolutely loved it. The whole culture changed. 1 minute they're wearing little suits and ties and standing very still and singing and performing. And then a couple of years later, everybody's in tie-dyed and love beads.
Yeah, it opened up society greatly, the Beatles, and then everything that happened thereafter. In the 60s was just a wild. You probably weren't alive in the 60s, but the 60s was a wild decade.
Something else that I also noticed was a serious thread that ran through your story was your expression of remorse, your expression of ownership of what you did, the crime that you committed. And I commend you for that. That seemed like it was incredibly important to you.
I wanted it to be in the book that I have great remorse for what happened in 1981. For some reason, over the years, the public has been thinking that I don't have remorse for what I did. But I have expressed every chance I've gotten over the years that I have great remorse for what I did, and I wanted that to come out in the book.
Well, I think you did a great job with that. That's why I wanted to make sure we talked about this, because I have, heard, and no, you've always owned it. You've always, from what I've seen, I went and looked up all of the interviews and everything that you've done over the last at least 20 years. And I've always heard you say that. So I think that was important to put out of people's minds. He is remorseful. You're not. Do you even recognize the person that you were back then?
No. I'm so far removed from that person that I can be talking about things that I did in the 70s and 80s. And I feel like I'm just talking about another person altogether, because I'm just not that person anymore.
Yeah. Was it difficult? Did you have any hesitation to write the book?
No. I thought it was time. I'm 70 years old now, so I'm really getting up there in age. And I thought, well, yeah, this might be a good time to write a memoir. And, Jason asked me if I wanted to collaborate on a book, and I thought about it. And I said, oh, well, okay, I'll do a book with you, because I did feel like it was time to tell my story from my point of view.
Well, your story's been told, but I think it coming from you, it's honest. And I found your book very raw and very truthful.
Well, there's been this, negative image of me for 40-something years. This government-sided image of me. So I wanted the public, if they read the book, to see the person that I really am. That I'm, just so far removed from that person in 1981, and I hope that comes out in the book.
I think it does.
Confronting high credit card debt can feel scary, but the good news is, if you owe $10,000 or more in credit card debt, financial relief options are now available. National Debt Relief is currently offering debt relief designed to reduce what you owe and put you on the fast track to becoming debt-free. If you qualify for debt relief, you may be able to pay back less than what you owe and save thousands of dollars. Just visit nationaldebtrelief.com. Imagine only paying one low monthly program payment you can afford and saving money as you become debt-free. National Debt Relief has already helped bring debt relief to over 550,000 U.S. consumers, earning thousands of five-star reviews and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. You're stronger than your credit card debt. Let today be the day you start turning things around. Take the first step and visit nationaldebtrelief.com to see what debt relief you may qualify for. That's nationaldebtrelief.com.
So, John, why don't you tell me about in the hospital when you first get there and you're the first time getting medication, how that healing began?
I got to St. Elizabeth the day after my verdict on my trial. I was sent to St. Elizabeth and to begin my treatment, and I was immediately put on medication and put into therapy groups. I got an individual therapist, and so I was receiving all this therapy and medication. But early on, I also met a woman named Leslie DeVoe. She was a patient there at the hospital too, and she was a wonderful person, and we fell in love and developed this long-term relationship. And I always credit her as being the person who got me well and got me out of my depression and my delusions. Her name was Leslie DeVoe. She has since passed away, but she was an angel in my life.
I'm sure you didn't expect that kind of thing to be happening as you're under all this psychiatric care. Did you see the difference between an obsessive love and actual true love after Leslie?
Yes. I mean, I saw that I was finally in a real relationship as opposed to the fantasy one I had with Jodie Foster. And yeah, it just totally brought me out of that depression that I had and the grand delusion I had that I was going to have this magical union with Jodie.
So I did notice a couple times while reading that you seemed somewhat annoyed. If that's the wrong word, correct me. But that mental health laws changed after your trial and being found not guilty by reason of insanity. That was one of the cases. Am I correct in what I perceived?
I don't know that I was annoyed. I mean, yeah, after my trial, the insanity defense was changed greatly, and because of my verdict today, it's very, very difficult to get to win an insanity acquittal. Mainly because of my verdict, there's a lot of outrage over my verdict, and they changed the law on the insanity defense. But I can't say that I was annoyed about it.
Well, I do think it made it harder for people to prove that, yeah, I really wasn't aware of right and wrong. I really didn't have a grasp of reality.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's a good thing.
No, it's not. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people these days who are truly mentally ill, who are and commit a crime, but are found guilty, because it's just so hard now to get not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah, I've been pushing for changes in mental health laws for a long time. And listen, I don't want to sound like I have answers. I really don't. But it needs to be addressed. And we need some brave legislators to actually do something to improve the situation and put some resources out there for people who are in this situation as well. But I'm sorry, I pontificate. I don't mean to. The other time I noticed that there seemed to be some, I don't know if annoy maybe isn't the word, but maybe despair that you were really healthy, but not being allowed to end your time at St. Elizabeth.
Well, yeah, I mean, because of the enormity of my crime and the political, everything that came into it politically, I stayed at St. Elizabeth's many, many years beyond what I should have been there. I was well at St. Elizabeth's for many years, but I couldn't get out because the government was fighting so hard to keep me confined, that I would keep petitioning the court over and over for freedoms. The government always fought it tooth and nail, and I would have to go through these mini trials every few years, these hearings, which I call trials, to try and prove that I'd overcome my illness and I was no longer a danger to myself or to the community. See, even my judge, when he gave me my freedom, my complete freedom, admitted that I would have been released from that hospital many years earlier had I committed almost any other crime.
If you'd picked anybody else.
Right. My father once told me, "John, you picked on the wrong person."
Yeah, you certainly did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been difficult being mentally healthy and denied. I mean, you were able to go on short visitations. You were gradually allowed to, leave, but not to go out free and be able to live your life.
Starting in 2003, I was given court permission to spend time out in the city with my parents. So we would go out into the suburbs of Washington, D.C. and do things. And over the years, the judge increased my freedoms greatly. And in 2016, he gave me what's called convalescent leave, where I could live outside the hospital permanently with a lot of court restrictions. But I was an outpatient to the hospital at that point and was living full time in Williamsburg, Virginia.
But it's still hanging over you. It still had to be in your mind that, if you have too many beers one night, I don't even know if you drink, but, and act out, could they put you back? I mean, it had to, that weight had to be on your shoulders.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had 37 court restrictions after I got convalescent leave. So I was still having to toe the line and live this perfect life to where I just could not even jaywalk, or they'd bring me back into the hospital. And I did everything perfectly, and I was the perfect patient. And then in 2022, the judge gave me my full release to where I had no court over me anymore.
And that's after 40 years.
Yeah.
Huh.
Long road.
I do know of other cases that were much more heinous, and people were out of jail long before 40 years. Just saying. I think there's some validity to what you're saying.
Well, I had many people over the years tell me that I would never get out. Yeah, John, you will never get out of there. And I always had just kind of say to myself, yes, I will. I'll get out one day.
Oh, good.
And sure enough, I did.
Yeah, I think part of the reason you were delayed so long is the stigma that's associated with mental illness. That it's not like you have a sore throat and you get an antibiotic and you recover. That it's a stigma that if you have a mental illness, it's something more than that. You can't just, I'm depressed, get medication and be treated. And unfortunately, it still exists today that there's something other than going on with people with mental illness?
The thing is, people are scared of mental illness. Let me give you an example. Rob Reiner was just savagely murdered along with his wife by their son, who
Yeah.
obviously is mentally ill, and they just immediately think, well, that's just another mentally ill person who's violent, did something terribly violent. And so people are scared of people who have mental illness. But of course, the overwhelming majority of people with mental illness don't commit heinous, violent crimes. And I think that's where the stigma comes in: is people are scared of mental illness.
Well, they're scared. They don't understand it. Yeah, a tiny fraction of people with mental illness are violent or dangerous to anybody. And people don't understand it. So they're frightened of what they don't understand. But it's like, guys, we're in the 21st century. I think we need to make an effort to let people know, look, you're having a bad time. I've noticed that with some of the research that they've done, that you'll get depressed, for example, and it will end. It will run its course. It will end. It's misery while you're going through it, but it will end. The catch is, though, if you get medication, it ends much more quickly. And they will note that your brain has changed after the depression and not for the better. So it's better to just get treated. I mean, who wants to let strep throat go into something more serious? George Washington died of strep throat.
Okay.
You just go get the medication.
I agree. I've always, there are people who say that, that psychotropic medications don't work, but I am here to tell you that they work for me. So.
Well, you have to find the right dose. And now they're even getting better now where they can be done with a look to DNA and your genetic background and created for the patient so they don't have to guess which one is going to work for you. They can actually figure that out ahead of time. I don't think people understand psychosis. I think they have an image, going back to this stigma, but I think they have an image of psychotic people as giggling and lashing out and frothing at the mouth. And that's not psychosis. And I think you are somewhat of a loner. I think you're somewhat on the quiet side, introverted. So I think it would have been harder for someone observing you to see anything but a young man with a guitar and, maybe talking to himself a little bit but we all do that. So I don't know if it would have been that obvious. You wrote in your book too, that psychosis is not something that you see unless you know what you're looking for.
Well, I was writing a lot of poetry in the 70s and early 80s. If you read some of those poems, you'll see my suffering and my depression and my psychosis in my poetry. And quite a bit of the poetry is in the book. And I'm glad it's there because you'll see that I was really, really suffering, and it was coming out in my writings.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I also want to point out that you were not, during a lot of this, you were not living with your parents.
No, I was not.
So it's not that you came from some abusive background or something.
I was living in little apartments by myself, just ruminating on wild and crazy things. And, a lot of dark thoughts.
I think when reality becomes subsumed by the fantasy, so when the delusion becomes so powerful, it is your reality. It is what you're believing. And why wouldn't you believe it's true if it's your reality?
Well, yeah, I didn't, I had the delusions, but I didn't believe they were delusions back in the 70s and early 80s. I thought it was my reality that I was going to have this union with Jodie Foster, I thought that was really going to happen. It's for me to talk about it now is I see how preposterous it was, but back then I truly believed it.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah, it would seem very, very real.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad that you did get the help. I'm glad that you did get out of St. Elizabeth's. Said first, weekends and then more and more, and then finally got to have them let go. What have you been doing since?
Mainly music and art. I consider myself now a singer-songwriter and artist. I have about 55 or 60 songs of mine on Spotify and iTunes and Apple and all the streaming sites. So if anybody wants to hear my music, just go to Spotify at one of the streaming sites and you can hear my songs. I have a YouTube channel, and most of my videos are me with my guitar singing my songs, and so you can see me doing it on YouTube. I also sell paintings online, mainly of cats, and that's the main things I've been doing. I just have days where I do what everybody else does: go to the grocery store and do my laundry, and I have 2 cats that I take care of. So I live a quiet life, but it's a good life.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. Would it be okay if I played some of your music on this episode?
That'd be fine.
Okay, because I did listen to some. I especially liked "I'm Just a Lonely Dreamer."
Right.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite.
Well, you can play that if you want to.
Yeah, I will definitely link your information to my blog where I put all my sources and whatnot. So we'll have that there so people can find you if they're interested. And you never know. You got to be in it to win it.
Maybe I'll be discovered that way, yes.
So with John's permission, I'm going to play part of his song, "The Majesty of Love," edited a little bit for time.
We all are striving to be free. We're in harmony. This is the majesty of love. When every couple settles down, goodness will be found. This is the majesty of love. With all the negativity, there's still you and me. This is the majesty of love. The world is still in so much pain, but we have much to gain. This is the majesty of love. I always find solace in you. No matter what we're going through, to rise above the world of hate, to navigate your fate. This is the majesty of love. I see the light up in the sky. It's the angels going by. This is the majesty of love. I always find my solace in you. No matter what we're going through, if you should ever be alone, you'll always have a home. This is the majesty of love. This is the majesty of love.
And there you have John Hinckley Jr.'s "The Majesty of Love."
Thank you.
Have you considered doing a book of poetry?
Well, I wish I had saved all those poems, but the poems are long gone, and a few of them were retrieved and were put in the book. But I had dozens and dozens and dozens of poems that I'd written, but unfortunately, they're long gone.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask you if there's anything we want to include.
I just want, to get the word out that my memoir has just been released. It's called Who I Really Am, and it tells my story from day one till now, and it's available on Amazon if you want to read my memoir. So please get a copy, and you'll get the real story from me of my life.
Yeah, I think you would know better than everybody else what was happening.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you might.
Okay.
That I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate it. I have to tell you, I was very nervous. John, I've not met a historical figure like you. I usually don't get this nervous, which is why I'm confessing, but I did. I was a little apprehensive. So, but thank you for bearing with me. And I'm going to talk up your book. I really think it's an important piece of history. It's important to set the record straight.
Well, thank you, and just promote it, and publicize it wherever you can.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, then I want to thank you both, Jason Norman and John Hinckley Jr., for coming on the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good evening.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye. Well, Murder Bookies, that wraps up my interview with John Hinckley Jr. and Jason Norman discussing their book, Who I Really Am. I have to admit, I was a little nervous doing this interview. In all of the true crime books that I've covered, this interview was my first with a perpetrator. John did shoot that gun. He did wound those people, and one dying later from the injuries inflicted. But he was found not guilty due to insanity, an insanity that is no longer present. And I'm all about supporting families and the victims, as this is a core value that guides me. And yet, all of my worries were for naught. I found John to be forthright, truthful, and earnest. And I hope that you heard that as well. I wish John well as he continues to write and perform his music. I did play some of it during the episode because music is so important to who he really is. And you can check out his YouTube page to hear his music, or his art page to look at some of the paintings that he's done. I do think it is incredible that he is putting himself out there, writing songs and singing them from the heart. You can buy John's book, Who I Really Am, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or from Wild Blue Press directly, and probably anywhere else that sells books. And I hope you will read it. There is some real substance and insights into his story. So, wrapping up now. My next episode on Incendiary by Michael Cannell will drop next week as criminal profiling is born, and as we begin to get answers as to who has been bombing movie theaters, expositions, bathrooms, train stations all over New York City for the last 16 years. I also have a number of special episodes in the works, some looking at the developments into the Long Island serial killer case, which will be coming to trial in 2026, and a look back at one of my most popular book trilogies with the author. So subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Join me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Murder Shelf Book Club for our monthly Zoom call and our serial killer class on the first Thursday of each month. We are into serial killer case studies now. And exciting news, my merch shop is open. With the Hamptons Whodunit coming up in April and CrimeCon in May, you won't want to miss out. If you still need a ticket to CrimeCon Las Vegas 2026, use my code, one word, all lowercase letters, MurderShelf, to enjoy a 10% discount. You can also find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. All of my sources are on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, February 2026. And don't hesitate to email me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com. Thank you for being part of this journey. I see you as you hear me. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.